Hi, so everyone, thank you for tuning in. My name is Shotaro Tani. I'm the Indonesia Correspondent for Nikkei Asia. And here with me, I have Joydeep from Traveloka and Andree from Waresix. We're going to talk about how these two have been navigating the crisis and how they have been able to fundraise during the pandemic. So just to give a brief introduction, I think Traveloka, you guys have raised 250 million. I think that was back in July, really when the crisis was starting to bite. And Andrew Wessex, you guys have been able to raise 100 million in September. So I think we have an interesting mix where we have Traveloka, which is obviously a travel company, and that's an industry that's been really struggling with the pandemic, whereas Wessex logistics company, and I should assume that you guys have seen business demand rise because everyone's now ordering stuff online, more e-commerce. So I think we have an interesting mix of speakers here. But before we get into all the fundraising stuff, can you just provide an overview of how the pandemic has affected your business, starting with you, Joydeep?
Sure. Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Yeah, so going back to the dark ages, I think if you look at the start of the year, Jan and Feb this year were quite good for us, but we started becoming more aware of what was happening in some other parts of the world, and kind of hoping and praying that the crisis doesn't come to these parts. But starting mid-March, we started seeing the impact, and from then onwards, it was a very short fuse to when the crisis really landed. Uh, Coming into April and May, across all our businesses, we saw demand come to a grinding halt. Um, it was something which was being observed across the world in pretty much all the travel sector players. And I think we saw the same pattern play out across all our markets, which were in some form of strict or mandatory lockdown in these 2 months. In parallel, in anticipation of what was to come, I think starting March, the management realized that given you can't really control demand levers or you can't control the outlook, there was a pretty swift shift towards controlling the levers which we could at that point of time, which meant looking at project prioritization, resource allocation, cost structure, etc. So that also kicked off around, I would say, mid-March onwards. And yeah, as in kind of we managed to actually really bring everything under control when the crisis really peaked, which was so far as we've seen it maybe was around April, May. So yeah, that perhaps would be a good recollection of what now seems some long time back.
And how's the business doing now?
I think we started seeing some shoots of recovery starting June in some of our markets, primarily domestic travel driven. So short travel, staycation driven. So Vietnam was the first market where we saw demand recover. And it was not very unexpected because it was quite directly correlated to how the local sort of markets were doing in terms of the crisis control. And I think Vietnam led the way and followed by Thailand. And then, of course, we saw other markets like Malaysia, Indonesia follow suit. So on the back of these trajectories, we have seen a decent recovery till date, and it continues to be heavily domestic, but that works in our favor because I think as a business, we are much more exposed to domestic travel. So overall, we feel okay right now at this point in time of the year.
Got it, got it, got it. And Andre, how about you? Am I right in assuming that businesses maybe doubled, tripled during this pandemic period?
Yeah, so I think in terms of that, I would like to give you guys an overview about what we are doing. So it's giving a better context, right? So I think we are 16 here. We are a logistics platform. What we provide is trucking and freight service, as well as warehousing. So in here, mostly we serve our client is B2B, like business to business. We cover mostly domestic logistics, the first mile container market, and long haul trucking, right? So in terms of the this past couple months, it affects the industry for sure. I would say we see there's a lot of different verticals that we have, right? Some verticals is going down very bad. For example, in here is like automotive sectors, it's affected. Some of the retail distributions is affected on the Q2, Q3 this year, because as we see that Indonesia, we have the economic contraction. So I think the other sector that is still actually growing is on the healthcare, pharmaceuticals, some of the commodities, agriculture is still there in some primary sectors. So what we see in here, when we see the demand drops, we try to be very agile on which sector that we want to navigate. Because if we dwelling in and pushing the directions of our company into the sector that is not doing well, it's really hard. Because it's not only affect the demands and order, but also it will affect the terms of payments, right? Terms of payment will be affected from the end customer to the distributor and so on. So even though we are doing the back end, somehow will affect that. So I see that the demand dropping is affecting most of the transport and storage industry in here. But there's some sectors that actually done really well. And then we try to navigate and invest our resource into that particular sectors. Yeah.
Right. So would you say net you have benefited from the pandemic, or have you taken a hit?
So I think in terms of the overall, we see that this pandemic, we see the benefit, especially when we see there's the disruption in the supply chain on the our customer, the rhythm they disrupt. This is a time where we are actually come in and serve our customers. So also at the same time, increase the adoptions of our tech to the vendor. Because previously it's really hard for them to try and then to try these things, because logistics is a very traditional industry. Is they already in the comfort zone, especially on the B2B. So when the demand drops, most of the supplier they want to get orders to fill their loads, right? So this is the time where we increase our tech adoptions. So therefore, we are able to reach out to bigger and capture and digitize more of our suppliers. At the same time, we are able to still capture the growth from our existing customers. Yeah.
Right. Got it. And now moving on to the fundraising side of things, as I said at the beginning, you two have been able to raise quite a big sum during the pandemic, where we've seen, obviously, generally the fundraising has dropped. Can you two just talk about the experience you had fundraising during this pandemic and how that differed from your usual fundraising pre-pandemic? Let's start with you, Andree.
Yeah. So my first engagement to some of the VC is actually on the beginning of the year, when we had a catch up, usually updates on the previous year and so on. And then I feel there's a tough time where we had to communicate with them, especially during the due diligence, right? Everything has to done between mixed virtual and actually physical due diligence. So it takes time for sure on how they can understand the business, how we can actually communicate with them. That is one of the challenges. But as long as we are disciplined in terms of the units of economics, disciplines on the financials, we do audits every year. I think this helps to show confidence and to explain about what we are actually doing to the investors. So we focus on our units of economics. We try to be disciplined from day one, because what we believe is that in logistics, you have to find efficiencies, right? Not only by subsidizing the market. So when you actually have a control on your business, it's actually giving a confidence that you can survive through this pandemic and you can grow faster. I think this is what we see. Yeah, compared to the previous fundraising, it takes longer time for sure. And then everything has to be managed virtually. Yeah.
Right. Were investors asking questions that you weren't getting asked before the pandemic?
Yeah, of course. Like the first question is, how do you predict profit in your projections? Right? That's and it's hard because we cannot predict things. There's a lot of uncertainty in here. We try to make sure that we still lean in the organization, and then we want to keep the muscle, and we want to cut away the fats. So I think in terms of how we want to see the financials and how we want to do resource prioritizations and the KYC is everything. It has to be taking more into deeper in terms of the study and the analytics. And when they ask about how it will affect your projection, and yeah, we try to be very conservative on the projection rather to give the aggressive. I think that's how we do it. Yeah.
Right, good. And as I understand it, Andree, Waresix is already EBITDA positive, right? So I was just wondering why you decided to do the fundraise, and especially why now? Why during the pandemic?
Okay, so I think positive units of economics means like we have a control on the business, right? And we see this pandemics, even though we know there's a problem, but we see opportunities. We are only scratching the surface in terms of logistics, so the market potential is really big. And then raising a sizable round, it will unlock our opportunity to see potential corporate actions. Because during this time, we see there's a lot of synergy, a lot of good assets, a lot of good founders that we can work together. So this is one of the reasons on why we decided to raise the money. Yeah.
Got it. And Joydeep, Traveloka, obviously, I would assume you guys had quite a tough time with investors trying to raise money with the way industry in general is in right now, the state it's in right now. So what was your experience with investors like during this period?
Yeah, goes without saying it was quite tough. I think clearly the toughest for Traveloka in its history, and as an I've been part of fundraisings in the past, and personally also perhaps the hardest one till date. But if you look at the new group of investors who joined the round, I think they had been following the company for a while. And we were in discussions with them pre-COVID also. So they had seen the company in the best of times. And they had a long-term conviction on the name, on the management, and the overall story. So I think we are quite grateful that they held on to that conviction even when COVID hit. And I think they took their time to make sure that they actually are going to come into a company where, first of all, the company can survive the crisis, and secondly, the management will be able to navigate the company back to its growth path, maybe delayed or lagged because of the COVID crisis. What also helped, again, to be candid, was some global blue chip travel names were also raising capital in the same time. That actually, I think, gave us confidence, gave the investor group confidence that if you can pick the right horses, which will hopefully survive this crisis, then the market will come back. So we did also see that play into the investor psyche, that kind of bet on the right names in the sector and the right region. I think that came to our sort of assistance also.
Right, and 250 million that you raised, I think that was one of the biggest fundraise during this whole, well, I think this year, ranks among the highest this year. Was that you guys saying, look, we're in trouble, we need quite a big check? Or was it the investors saying, look, we trust you, this is a big check, but we trust you to get back to where you were, and so please take this big check?
I think our initial plan was actually always to, kind of raise somewhere in that zip code, if not slightly higher. So it was not more correlated to we are in trouble and this is almost sort of the, last ditch or rescue financing, because we had resources in place. And as I said, the management started solving for an outlook where we could survive even without any new dollars coming in. So I think this amount kind of is a triangulation of investor interest, how much we thought we needed to really feel comfortable that we can really run out the crisis and come back to a growth mode quite strongly. And generally, I think, given the scale and size of the company, what would make the right sense. So it was not really a magic number which we were sort of, solving for to save the company at that point of time.
When you were raising funds, what were the messages that you were trying to convey to the investors?
I think, yeah, so continuity was one very important factor. So it's a group, you have to acknowledge that, Traveloka did not have a crisis playbook. It's a post-GFC company. So the management, the founders, they had not seen a crisis of this scale. Actually, it applies to a lot of companies today in this region. So it was a lot of real-time sort of, reaction decision making. So the ability of the team of the company to react, how it managed its partners, its customers, how everything was brought under control in a very short period of time. I think that became quite an important sort of representation to our prospective investors at that point of time. So, to one of your questions to Andree, for example, new areas of focus which we had not seen in the past. I think in general, we kind of, working capital is an area which comes up and sort of, in general conversation, but at this point in time, that was a key area of focus. How is the company managing its resources? How do you manage, let's say, customer refunds? How do you manage your partners? I think we were able to really sort of, I guess, continue to demonstrate that faith, that look, as in, the same group of people who have delivered on growth metrics can also very quickly pivot their focus and manage the company through a crisis. So our investors, who are generally long-term capital in nature, I think they wanted to see that you are able to navigate the company through both ups and downs.
Right. And as a reporter, I'm quite interested to know how the due diligence process went during the pandemic. So obviously, I'm hearing from the investors that it's quite difficult for them to do the due diligence, as Andree said, because due diligence requires you actually meeting the person, and part of the art of investing in startup is where you actually talk to the founders and you look at the team and you talk to them, have lunch with them, have dinner with them, and you get to know them, and then you can trust that this is a startup that's worth investing in, which is probably hard to do over a Zoom call, obviously. So Andree and Joydeep, whichever of you, how was the due diligence process from your side?
So I engage to some of the new investors on January. So that's actually we had a chat.
Right.
So I think that's a give me more the advantage, because that time I understand there's a COVID is there, and then, well, some of my family member told me not to fly, for example, to Singapore to meet them, but I see, oh, okay, this is my only opportunity to fly and meet around with them. So I take my time and I fly around and catch up with the investor that we know for quite some times, and then the new investors. And then the conversation developed from that time, and mostly the assessing investor also helps, because the commitment from the assessing investor, when they see they want to invest more and support the company for growth, it shows confidence to the new and the new investors. So I think that's how we see the trajectories of the company and the developments of the fundraising stage, right? Because if it's only from the new investor, it's really hard to justify. But if the existing investor put in significant amount of checks as well, it's create comfortable. Most of the due diligence done through the third party. They hire third party, which is more costly, right? So check on the ground, to interview some of the customers, to interview some of the suppliers, the truckers, take a pictures and so on. And then, but it's done. They done it pretty well and properly. All the legal DD, financial DD, the tax DD, and the commercial DD as well. So I think this is how we see. I think the only difference is on the management presentation, which we usually done through the face-to-face meeting or the final. We do that through the Zoom, and then yeah, it's turns out it's okay. Yeah.
What about you, Joydeep?
Yeah, would agree. So I think, look, the relations with these investors was built over time. So it was not like, kind of start and stop during the COVID period, right? So we had built a relation with some of our investors over time, and management meetings or just in-person meetings happened even prior to COVID. So that really helped build the, I would say, chemistry and the conviction. And then I think, as I said, continuity sort of built over time. So a lot of the diligence did happen over Zoom calls, but I think given we had sort of established a first person connection prior to that, it became easier to navigate. And of course, existing investors do support quite a bit in terms of just, also participating in building confidence. So it was hard when we were going through it, and there were tough days, but having built a relation in person prior to those meetings and sessions did make all the difference.
But both of you, you obviously had your investors coming into your respective rounds, but would you say, were it not for the pandemic, you will probably have been able to tap into a much broader investor base?
I think for us, maybe, I think we did get the investors we wanted, especially for this round. But I think in terms of the investor base, clearly COVID did have a fairly significant impact on specific pockets of capital. So for example, pools of capital which are able to sort of, let's say they have both private public mix and they are basically clocking both or monitoring both segments. I think March, April did provide a very good window of investment for the public sector investors, right? So I think that capital might have been hard to, or rather it would have been easier for us to get that if there was no COVID, because, I think the drop in the markets did provide them an entry opportunity. But in general, the investors we wanted more long-term focused, I think we managed to still get them in.
Yeah, I think I totally agree on what Joydeep mentioned earlier. So especially for logistics, and we talk about Indonesia or Southeast Asia, we get the set of investor that we want to onboard actually, because the main thing in here is the journey is still long for us to capture and to create an impact to the logistic ecosystems. So I think this will be the new stepping stone, our Series B, before we actually grow faster. And they have to first and foremost understand the business and understand Southeast Asia, because it's different. We have a different geographic compared to any other developed countries. We have a different policies, and then all the good thing with this pandemic is that the internet penetration is very high, so it helps our digitalization process, the paperless and so on. That helps. Yeah.
Well, you mentioned an interesting point there, Andree, in that Indonesia is kind of a difficult market for investors, especially coming outside of Southeast Asia, to understand. So, and when I talk to startups, that's something that they usually say, that it's difficult for them to really understand the market. It's difficult to persuade them on the importance of Southeast Asia and Indonesia. So was that the same during this? And was that more difficult now that there's this pandemic going on, and obviously the Southeast Asia, Indonesia numbers, coronavirus cases continue to go up? So were investors taking a more skeptical look at Indonesia? Yeah,
so I think that's definitely affect things. But what I told them is logistics is enduring business. During this period of time, we still have to distribute products. And then even if you ask our team, since the day of the COVID, they're still on ground actually to educate the drivers somehow, to take shift, but we do regular checkups on them to make sure they're healthy and so on. Because the thing is, logistics, you cannot only in the front end. You have to prepare infrastructures, you have to prepare the back end and some of the operations. But in general, even if the case is going up, but it means that the product that we deliver has just to shift to mass or to, I don't know, like self-protections or whatever, like the mask or the medical equipment. So it's just a shift of the product when this happens. So selection of the industry verticals and be able to flexible and agile on this situation is really important.
I got it. And Joydeep, what about you? I believe you had Middle Eastern investors come into your 250 million round. So how convinced were they by Indonesia and Southeast Asia's potential during this pandemic?
I think can't comment on the specificity of the investment. I think, look, Indonesia generally has stood the test of time when it comes to attracting capital into the tech sector in general as investment. So again, I think the investors took a view of the sort of resilience of the market, of the users, of the company itself. So I think, yeah, as and I would agree with Andree that the ability of the company to show agility also did become quite important. So while we were kind of constrained with a large part of our business really being super slow, but there were certain pockets where, for example, we have a financial service business and we offer a few products to our users. They were showing pretty interesting growth possibilities. So these things kind of continue to reassert the point that, the market itself is actually good. And that helped, of course.
What about the outlook? First of all, the outlook of your prospective companies. So Joydeep, Traveloka, 250 million. I would assume you wouldn't have to raise capital anytime soon after that. But business environment going forward, fundraising plans going forward. What's the outlook?
Let me get out my crystal ball. But jokes aside, I think, yeah, look, on the capital side, I think we feel relatively quite comfortable right now. Just in terms of the outlook, I think, there's been some positive news globally around the vaccines, and the stock markets are already pricing in a decent amount of recovery next year globally. I personally am looking forward to 2022, which I call the year of revenge travel. People are going to get out and travel at every given opportunity they get. So we are looking forward to that both professionally and personally. So I think we'll continue to, I guess, really invest in the core businesses we have. And as the markets recover, grow proportionately along with that. So that's the focus over the next 1 to 2 years.
I think the strategy Traveloka was taking before the pandemic hit was really to, obviously it was, focusing on overseas travel as well, but you guys were doing some activity platform where you offer, local activities for domestic travelers.
Yeah.
Will that strategy change after the pandemic? Would you say people will still be kind of skeptical of hopping on the plane and going to overseas destinations, so they'll still be more inclined to travel domestically, and so the domestic activity service that you're providing, that's going to be your focus going forward, or are you going to go back to focusing on the overseas travel?
I think the focus was never exclusive. So we were not just focusing on the overseas attractions and activities. Domestic, or what we call local lifestyle, was quite an important priority and continues to stay so. And we have become an even more important, I would say, partner to a lot of the sort of players in the market on the supply side, because we are able to educate and communicate better with the users on, hygiene standards, what's the new normal, booking slots in advance will become even more important as we go ahead. So we see our role becoming more relevant in the local lifestyle space. And if the pattern or the trend becomes that domestic travel drives that consumption more, good for us. But even if the overseas picks up, I think we are well positioned on that side also. So it's not going to be either or, but I think given domestic is what has recovered faster, we do expect domestic experience or local lifestyle to also be the first to come back stronger.
Do you think the worst is over for the travel industry?
I wish I could give an answer to that, but I don't know, honestly. We all hoping for that, again, both personally and professionally. But we like what we see in terms of, some of the numbers in the domestic markets, but one can only hope. It's very hard to give a very conclusive answer to that.
Got it. And Andree, what about you? Outlook on your company and the industry as a whole?
Yeah, so I think what we see is, especially right now, is during the end of the year, right? We did some of the revisions on the financial planning analysis and the budget as well, especially on the shift of the sectors. Because we interview to some of our customers, we want to understand the way that we understand how they have a big sales, like aggressive sales, or just conservative is by understanding their logistic pattern and the shipments, right? Some of our customers, they try to project their um, sales is equivalent to this year or maybe less, but other customer is quite aggressive on their projections. So we try to balance between which industry vertical that we want to push forward, and then on how we want to building the traffic and network across these different islands. Because for us, we have to balance between product that we want to deliver from one point into another, because we want to optimize for example, in here, the backhaul, or how we want to optimize the strategy of the shipments and so on. So one thing that I have to understand is there will be a lot of uncertainty still, especially from the big guys and the medium to small, the medium to large enterprise. But the selections of the sectors and industry vertical, this will be the key for us for 2021. And I hope in 2022 is the day when we fully recover. That's what Joydeep mentions, right? Yeah, I think that's how we see. But in overall, I'll say that logistics is still a good market for us. It will still grow, but depends on how fast we want to grow. It's really depend on the industry verticals.
So what are the sectors that you be putting more focus on going into 2021?
Okay, some of the sectors that we see that might be growing is some telecommunications, because when there's internet, you need the internet, you have to install a lot of telecommunication infrastructure, spare parts, and so on. This will be one sector. And then, of course, the primary sectors and commodities will be there, because you still have to buy that. You have to use these commodities and those kind of derivatives to power the Indonesia, right? And then and the healthcares for sure. And then healthcares and medical equipment, that's something that will continue stable and growing. Especially what we see is that vaccine will be out hopefully by soon or maybe early next year. So vaccine distribution is also something that's quite interesting that we study the market.
Yeah, let me press you on that. So some vaccines that are coming out right now, they obviously require extremely cold temperatures to move around. So is Waresix in a position to provide that kind of logistics if and when those vaccines come to Indonesia?
Okay, I think in terms of the cold storage capability, we do have it. For the like cold storage distribution, that's something that we don't have right now. We are studying. We are actually understanding how we want to do this. So I cannot comment on that yet on the distributions, because it's a different. Yeah.
Got it. And I think we have a couple of minutes remaining. So if there's any questions from the listeners, I'll be happy to take them. I'll just keep speaking until something comes along. So Joydeep, where are you planning to go off to as soon as the travel restriction is lifted?
I was actually thinking about it. I think the first visit will be home, back to visit the parents in India. But after that, I think Jakarta beckons. It's been a while. So, and then let's see, as in kind of, the list is only growing as we wait.
Right. And Andree, have you got any travel plans?
Well, there's a lot of travel plans, right? But I think I'll just try to travel in between the inside the countries first, right? To explore a lot of because that's the most feasible, right? We don't know if I have traveled to some area that I want to travel, but I don't know how the situation over there. So I try to go somewhere nearby around Southeast Asia, at least to have a quick break and so on. But normally it's try to stay close Southeast
Andree,
Asia.
Traveloka can help you with that.
For sure. Traveloka, yeah, I was a big fan of Traveloka, so don't worry. I'm gonna use Traveloka for sure.
So one thing that stuck with me after I talked to William Tanwijo of Tokopedia was that when he was in Japan, he had a chance meeting with Son-san. So I was wondering if, when you travel abroad, do you have like chance meeting with investors?
Well, I try to find time to catch up with some of our investors. Depends on the countries. If I travel to Japan, I catch up with my Japan investor. If I travel to Korea, I catch up with my Korean investor as well as Singapore. We try to keep them as in the loop, not only as Joydeep mentioned, building the reputation relationship for a long term is it's really helpful for us, not only creating confidence to invest on the company, but also sharing burden and sharing some idea on how we can move forward and grow together.
Right, got it. And so, Joydeep, we actually have a question for you, Joydeep. So, question from Delano Musafa. He or she is asking, any comments on IPO plans, US or local IPO or both? So dual listing is something that other unicorns have obviously talked about. Gojek and Tokopedia, I think they've said they would prefer a dual listing in Indonesia and preferably in the US. So what about you guys?
I think we are studying. It's maybe a bit early to have a view on it, but we are looking at the options available to us. I think dual listing is something we have also taken into consideration, and we'll look into it in terms of pros and cons.
One of the things that I continuously hear from startups is that single listing isn't an option for unicorns the size that they are now, because the Indonesian stock market is just too small to take the volume of shares that the unicorns will release into the market. So isn't dual listing really the only option for unicorns?
I think really depends on the scale, but this has been acknowledged, and there are people who are looking into this quite actively at the IDX level. So everyone's hopeful that things might sort of change in the next 1 or 2 years. But I think that is one of the factors which is taken into consideration: the depth of the market and the liquidity itself. There haven't been too many precedents in this part of the world to begin with. So I think Hong Kong, New York are basically much more richer when it comes to precedents. But I think, this clearly becomes one of the key factors in terms of whether the market can absorb IPO of the scale or size.
And I guess you guys were quite happy with Airbnb filing their IPO. How's that affected your thinking in any way?
Look, we've always kind of liked the company. It's a great management team. The way Brand kind of communicated and managed the company in the middle of crisis was quite spectacular. So we are quite, I would say, encouraged by their S1 filing and the fact that they're getting a fairly positive reaction from the market so far. So yeah, we're looking forward to a successful listing, and hopefully that kind of builds towards our momentum also when we become ready. So all the best to them.
Got it. And a question from Kevin Tanzo. Maybe, Andree, you can answer this. How does the political climate in Indonesia affect the private equity and venture capital industry, especially in terms of attracting investment and long-term confidence?
Okay. Well, I think in general, we see there's a positive magnitude in terms of the investment to Indonesia, because it's reflect on how our currency actually gets stronger. And then as well as we see a lot of new investors coming in and opening up more factories. They investing quite heavy because they see the population is here, it's sizable, and it's growing market. So regardless about the political issues, Indonesia, I'll say, or Southeast Asia, it's always been interesting for everyone to come in, but they just have to understand the market. Yeah.
And I think that was perfect. We are out of time now. So thank you, Andree and Joydeep, for your fascinating insights, and thank you for tuning in.
Okay, thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank
Thanks.
you.
Bye.